Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, December 30th, 2025. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, on this special year-end edition of Daily Drive, we continue our conversation with the Automotive News Tech and Innovation team with a look at the impact of tariffs and trade policy, as well as the year EV makers like Tesla and Rivian had in 2025. Molly Boygon covers vehicle software, connected technology, and more, and host of the Automotive News Shift podcast. John Irwin covers tariffs and the supply chain. Lawrence Iliff covers Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and other automakers from Silicon Valley, and Richard Truitt covers engineering and JLR. Here's a piece of our conversation. Lonnie, you are kind of, boots on the ground in Silicon Valley. You are our eyes and ears. Tesla had a complicated year. We had their sales, their financial performance, Elon Musk's political involvement, and the impact on the brand. What happened this year?
I think, Tesla's trying to be a technology company. Tesla is trying to get in on the AI and robots and robo-taxis, because the auto industry, even though Tesla's margins have been pretty good, they're coming back down to the auto industry margins. And that's not what Elon wants. He wants it to be a tech company. He wants it to make a lot of money and move into the future. So Tesla's really got a kind of a 2 feet situation. It's got 1 foot in the car industry where it has to make cars and sell cars and make money. And then it has 1 foot in, artificial intelligence, robots, robotics, where it sees the future, right, of its business. And so I think that it's been a juggling act all year, right? It's been a juggling act. They've had to really incentivize their cars to sell them. They've kind of tried to freshen them up. Kind of sales are down, a little bit in the US, a lot in Europe, kind of flat in China. So they're kind of, fighting for their market share in the automotive industry. That is complicated by Elon Musk politics, right? Because he will get on a rampage on Twitter and get really focused on one thing, like the right-wing party in Germany and why they're the only one who can save the country, or, what's going on in Britain with some of these other political things that sometimes are even kind of obscure. So that has hurt sales. I think in the U.S. too, he's obviously very closely associated with Donald Trump. He was part of the administration. They had a big fight and now they've kind of made up. And so that has kind of, complicated consumers, attitudes toward Tesla. But I think that, I was feeling a little bit pessimistic about them when there was a lot of blowback from his politics and the products were getting stale. But I'm seeing a lot of progress on what they say is really their next business, and that is robotic cars, right? Their robotaxi rollout hasn't been very impressive. It's only about 30 cars in Austin, and they still have safety drivers. But you can see, people using their software, millions of people using their software. Maybe not millions, hundreds of thousands of people using their software. And the videos they show, and you can really see that they are progressing. And they may very well have actual self-driving cars that consumers can buy, and actual self-driving cars that you can hail as a robo-taxi in a few years, and that could be a big pivot for them.
I think that people can separate the man from the brand, and here's how they're doing it in Detroit. I was coming to work the other day, and I got behind the Model Y, and someone had put a Pontiac emblem right in the center where the T was, and I've seen a Mazda one there before. So yeah. I think people are going to buy Teslas, but maybe not associate themselves with the man so much. What do you think?
Well, California was what launched Tesla, right? This is where their first plant was, and this is where people bought Teslas. Overwhelmingly, really bought into the brand. And, California sales for Tesla have fallen as EV sales have grown, but they haven't fallen that much. There's still a lot of people, and I think it comes down to one thing, and that is, if you are an early adopter, if you are really into this technology, if you love the software, Tesla is, the brand. It just really is. They have really dedicated a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of engineering talent. And when you talk to like the CEO of Rivian, he's like, yeah, it's, Tesla and us. I mean, if that's what you're into right now, obviously most Americans aren't into that yet. Most American cars are into hybrids and gasoline. I want to do that, but I think they are really laying the groundwork for the future. And I do not think that there's going to be billions of humanoid robots, right? Turning the globe into a utopia where nobody has to work, as Elon Musk said. But I do think that the next step, which is the self-driving, I think that that could be a big deal.
Lonnie, on the self-driving thing, how has the conversation evolved around the cameras versus LiDAR debate? Because I expected that that would end up being a bigger problem for Tesla, the reliance on cameras, but it doesn't seem like that's been the case.
Well, that's a very interesting debate because in the United States, the only real robotaxi company successful in making, safety record is Waymo. And Waymo believes in all the sensors, right? It believes in the LiDAR and advanced radars and, there's all different kinds of sensor stacks. So they've taken the approach of we're going to be careful and, we're going to have, and their safety record's amazing. And so that's kind of the training wheels, let's call it, right? And Tesla wants to take off the training wheels. It wants to get all that stuff off the car and use cameras. And I think there was an argument that, or is an argument that, that can't work because you don't have enough data going into the car for it to make all these complicated decisions. And the more types of sensors, LiDAR, radar, cameras, your car will make better decisions. But I think, talking to people in the industry is that AI is changing that, right? AI and these crazy compute platforms and these NVIDIA chips are getting to the point where cameras can make a lot of really good decisions based on their AI training. And so I think you could have a situation where robo taxis with cameras may not be able to operate in snow and like the most challenging conditions, but probably could do a lot of the work, and then maybe Tesla will add some sensors on there. We'll see.
Lonnie, you recently interviewed Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe. I wanted to touch on Rivian because we spoke about them a little earlier. But what's going on there? Let's dig a little deeper. They had their partnership with Volkswagen Group. Volkswagen invested $5 billion. Of course, as we spoke earlier on, the R2 launch planning for next year. And then Rivian's vision for software-defined and self-driving vehicles. What's happening with Rivian?
I think Rivian's trying to get to the next level, right?
Yeah.
As a startup or a former startup, right? It's been about 4 years since they launched their first vehicles, pickup, SUV, and vans for Amazon, right? And then they revised that platform to be from kind of a more traditional type platform to more of a software defined platform. And so now they're trying to follow the Tesla playbook. Basically, they're trying to get to the next level as quickly as possible with a mass market vehicle, followed by more mass market vehicles, a new factory in Georgia, and then, get in on the self-driving and all the technology that Tesla and some of the Chinese companies have pioneered. And it's going to be really difficult for them because, it's a heavy pull with everything that's going on with the lack of the EV credits. And that's not just a consumer credit. There's other credits in there, right? And all the money they're going to need to do what they have to do. But I think that they are looking, for 5 years from now, if they can just grind it out, they could be the next Tesla.
And Lonnie, is the VW partnership, is that a lifeline for Rivian, or is it a sign that they just can't do it by themselves?
Well, it's interesting because it's also a sign that Volkswagen can't do it by
Yeah, good
themselves.
point.
So Rivian basically spent a lot of money developing this technology, but Rivian needed money to keep going to make cars, right? And so Volkswagen's the opposite, right? Volkswagen makes a lot of cars, but Volkswagen needs the technology. And so they came together. And, I went to an event with Volkswagen and Rivian at their Palo Alto offices where they're doing all this stuff. And it's really impressive. It is really interesting how these platforms also bring down costs, right? Rather than having 100 chips in a car and hoping that, your supply chain will come through, you have 3 computer processors that are doing all that work. You cut down a lot of the wiring. And so I think that their joint venture isn't just like Rivian gives something to Volkswagen. It's them developing these things together for their own companies. And Volkswagen said, even if for some reason Rivian has troubles financially, the joint venture will continue on. And eventually you're going to have the platform developed by Rivian and Volkswagen. Rivian did most of the work. Now Volkswagen is working on it, on tens of millions of Volkswagen cars. That's what Volkswagen says. So it looks like it could be a good partnership if everything goes well, which, there'll probably be rocky moments for sure.
Cal, allow me to retort. It's one thing to have a vision, and it's quite another to execute it in a consumer-friendly way. And last week, Consumer Reports came out with its brand report card. And Rivian, to me, was the most interesting. On one hand, it was the brand that consumers said they love the most, they're most loyal. On the other hand, it finished dead last in reliability rankings. So, in other words, people like what Rivian is trying to do, but they don't love the way it's being performing in the marketplace. And Lonnie, I think that's a big problem, that they've got to get reliability under control.
I think what's interesting, and I have not had time to look at that, but in these Consumer Reports things, and they have a podcast, so I've listened to their podcast and I know about some of this. Some of this is just the technology, like if you have a very complicated, over the air software update, right? And it has, bugs and glitches, and I have a software update. Now my wipers don't work, or the automatic wipers don't work. And I had a software update, and now when I go up to my car, it doesn't unlock automatically. And so I wonder how much of it is just, software teething pains, because we've seen, Tesla used to be at the bottom too, and now they've come up quite a bit. Their software is getting a lot better. And so with electric cars, a lot of times the real reliability problems is the software and all these advanced features. And, when your software updates and then you can't do things that you could do beforehand, people get really frustrated. And I think that, following Rivian forums and Tesla forums for that, and Lucid forums, they all complain about the software and the software updates, because we're in this, transition from little chips all over the car where one chip does your windows up and down to, computers and big software stacks that can get messed up. So I know that has been a problem for Rivian in terms of the software.
Well, to your point, Tesla finished 10th on the brand report card for Consumer Reports, and that was their best showing ever.
Yeah.
And what that means, Jake Fisher said, is that they're getting a handle on their problems and fixing them.
Coolest tech of 2025. Richard, what tech did you see this year that impressed you?
Boy, I know Molly's going to light me up for this one, but you know what? There was no technology that totally, I thought, this is awesome.
Wow.
I'm beginning to detest what cars are becoming, which are basically iPhones on wheels. I sat in a Volkswagen ID Buzz earlier, and I sat there like a moron trying to figure out how to raise and lower the windows. Got into a Mercedes-Benz, I couldn't adjust the mirrors. That's not progress. That doesn't make the driving situation any better if you have to sit there and think about what you do. I understand that we need safer cars. I understand AI has a role to play in that. But turning the car into a mobile iPhone is the wrong direction. And I also see another thing that maybe my esteemed colleagues there don't see, is that the way cars are being designed now is a very subtle thing that's happening. They're being designed to be thrown away like iPhones. In other words, you'll have a car get out of the warranty period, and then you'll have something fail that's a $10 part, but it costs $3,500 to put it in, and people just scrap the car. They're not being designed for serviceability. If I sound like I'm down on the auto industry, you're right, I'm down on it, because they are fundamentally disrespecting the consumers that that have to pay tens of thousands for their cars. But Kel, to answer your question on technology, okay, there were a few things that were impressive this year. And I know that Molly and especially Lonnie will agree with me. First of all, we saw battery technology improve really greatly, where now when an EV comes out, it can get 300 miles of range. We've seen charging technology get more dependable and more reliable, and less complaints about that. And I think we've seen the steady improvement in hybrid powertrains, and that's been an improvement too. So, okay, I'm not totally down on all technology, just the stuff I don't like.
I can't argue with the serviceability point, and I feel like that's Richard, you're just the best because you offer such an interesting, like, unique perspective on that type of thing. But I think that the larger transition to increasingly software enabled and software defined features, we're kind of in this weird, like, it's like almost like a mullet. Like, we're growing out a bad haircut because what you what you really want ultimately is for the vehicle not to be controlled by touch of any kind, because the whole task of driving requires like your full attention. You ultimately want all of these things to be controlled by voice. And we're kind of in this like weird transition period right now where, much to many people's chagrin, there's the removal of the physical buttons from the vehicle. You have increasingly complex kind of touchscreen menus to navigate. The central infotainment display is like a source of major distraction. But ultimately, all of this is supposed to be controlled by voice, which is getting a little bit better as automakers move these large language models off the cloud and basically build smaller models onboard the vehicle that can handle natural language commands. But in general, I think that um the perspective that you're espousing, which is very common, my ability to control my vehicle is being taken from me, and whatever happened to my right to you know basically do whatever I want. And you look at the fatalities. So you have like 17,000 odd fatalities from January through June. And my argument is that the consumer has basically uh abdicated the responsibility that they own over the motor vehicle. Like, people are getting increasingly reckless. They're driving drunk, they're driving distracted, and actually I think the automakers have a larger role to play in creating even more safety interventions in the vehicle that they won't do. So the technology that I found really interesting this year is New York State and a bunch of other states are implementing speed limiters in cars where people have like many red light violations or other moving vehicle violations, and those drivers will not be able to exceed a certain speed limit. And that's the type of thing that the auto industry could feasibly do. But right now it's sort of like an untouchable conversation because of the sort of like American spirit of, let me do whatever I want in my vehicle and I should be able to have full control. So, agree to disagree.
I'm not sure this is a question that any of us here could answer, but how much of this is a generational thing? I have decades on you,
Oh,
Molly, and
this
I
is
tell you what,
totally a generational thing. Richard, you still own a flip phone, and I don't even know what kind of
I,
phone you own, but I assume you have a flip
I,
phone.
I'd love to get in a car and be the captain of my own ship, and I don't ever see that changing.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I mean, it also must be said that I live in New York City. I take public transportation. I don't own a car. So you and me are really kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think my age and, but there is this increasing, as I said earlier in the conversation, brand agnosticism, focus on technology for the younger consumer. And I actually think that the industry is probably not doing enough to meet the moment in that case.
But Lonnie and John, let me ask you guys this question. I have yet to get into a car that has a Navi system that works as good as Siri. I can get into any car and I say, Siri, take me to wherever, and it works perfectly. And yet, if I go into a Tesla or any other kind of car, I'm punching buttons or it can't pick up my voice and it doesn't work as well. Why is that?
I think it's a learning curve. I think it's a learning curve. Just like I remember when, my older brother first got a smartphone and he was just like looking at it and like, what? And, over time, now he's great at it. He posts videos, he does all kind of stuff. And so I think, once you learn how to do it, once there's voice, once you, get into that, owner's manual and do the work, then those tasks become easier. There is a thing that Tesla has right now where you get in your car and you say, I want to go to the gym, and you press a button, and that's it. You don't do anything. It takes you to the gym, and it parks for you, and you get out of the car, and someday you'll probably be able to do that with the back seat. And to Molly's point, I mean, all these systems are just so safe. I don't have the numbers in front of me from Waymo, but some of their safety things are down like 90% from human drivers. And I think sometimes we forget that, a lot of people die on the road, a lot of pedestrians die on the road, and a lot of bikers die on the road. And here in California, we have skateboarders and stuff. I have to drive like at 25 miles an hour because there's so many different possible connections that I could have, just going down the street. And so I think I agree with Molly that the biggest technology thing is going to be safety. It's going to be all these sensors and software and all this stuff that we don't like. We're not going to even drive our cars someday, maybe on, a lot of the time. And I think that's hard, for people who are really steeped in the nostalgia, where every single car has, different buttons, and they're in different places, and cars have personality. They make different sounds. The gear shift feels different. The clutches feels different. Remember clutches, right? And so I think that is going to be hard.
Before we wrap up, John, any supply chain innovations that solve problems this year?
Yeah, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I've been basically just neck deep in tariffs and trade stuff this year that the thing that comes to mind, for me is, I've heard so much from suppliers about how they're utilizing, new AI tools just to help them get a better grasp of their supply chains. And I think that's really helped them this year, considering all of the, turmoil that we've seen and all the changes in trade policy, et cetera. I remember going back even in January around CES this year, almost a year ago now, where I visited Aptiv, and they were touting this new AI tool that they had that helped them basically map out their entire supply chain, which you'd think every company would have that mapped out, but in a lot of cases, it's basically impossible once you get into deep into, several tiers deep. And that was a big problem for them during semiconductor shortage. You might not, a part's not going to arrive at, your factory, and you're trying to figure out, okay, where is the hang up? Well, it's, 5 tiers deep. There's a little company that's not getting whatever part, and it's not getting to you. And that's leading to all sorts of issues. Now they're able to see that. They're able to pinpoint, okay, here's a potential issue here. We can dial up who to talk to pretty much instantly. That was a big issue before. You might, maybe you get wind of where an issue is in the supply chain, but you might not have a contact there, or you might not know exactly who the best person to reach. I think it's an interesting example of, there's a lot of talk about AI, and there's a lot of hype, I think, in a lot of cases of, a lot of overhype in a lot of cases when it comes to AI, or certain uses of it that are, maybe thinking as a writer here, less than ideal. But there are examples of AI as a tool that helps to, make everyone's jobs easier. And for supply chain managers and purchasing managers, maybe the most thankless job in the auto industry, it's helped to make their lives at least a little bit easier amid all the chaos and all the changes that we've seen this year.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer for his help on today's podcast. You can get the latest news on tech and innovation, trade and tariffs, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for the first piece of our year-end conversation with the Automotive News retail team. We'll talk about regulatory wins and losses for dealers, as well as the growth of Amazon Autos through 2025.
Tariffs, I think a lot of the automakers actually ended up taking on some of the price increase.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.